In the midst of the Baroque era and in the Counter-Reformation, which we will be talking about in context, you have this beautiful church being built called Il Gesu. And so our piece for College Board is going to deal with the front or the facade of the building, which you see in the far left, the interior of the structure, and then the ceiling painting, the fresco that's on the right. And when you look at your ID information, you'll see that there are different artists for those particulars of the structure. So in this one, be really careful with the artists, but we're not going to spend really time on the artist, and we're going to talk more about what's going on in the era and what you are seeing in front of you with all three of these items. So let's start off with context. And the two most important things really are understanding what is the Reformation and what is the Counter-Reformation. So I've talked about this before in the Allegory of Law and Grace piece, the woodcut by Lucas Cranach. But just as a kind of a review of that, remember the Reformation is that Protestant rebellion, the movement led by Martin Luther, really arguing that the Catholic Church was corrupt with the sale of indulgences and the growth of power and wealth within the Catholic Church. So, wanting to branch off from that and forming the Protestant faith. And then as a reaction to that Reformation, you have the Catholic Church and its response called the Counter-Reformation. And really think of it like a big advertising campaign. They need, the Pope, the Catholic Church needs to convince people not to leave the church and join the Protestants. They want the people to remain faithful, to get people to stay with the church. And so in the Baroque era, that's really the time of this Counter-Reformation where the Catholic Church uses art, music, the visual arts, architecture, and writing to really speak to the people who are faithful and the people who are questioning the church. And so this piece of art definitely kind of checks all those boxes. So our first vocab term is the Jesuits. Now, the Jesuits is a group that was founded by St. Ignatius of Loyola, and it was a group meant to aid the Catholic Church by going out and doing educational work, missionary work on behalf of the church, to educate people on the Catholic Church and to really get people to join or get people to stay. And they kind of unofficially became known as the Pope's Army. And the weapon of their army was education. So that's why today you still have many colleges throughout the world that are Jesuit schools, because they really did educate. That was their mission, basically, and that was their role within the Counter-Reformation. And so this church, El Gesu, was the first Jesuit church, kind of the mother church, the Jesuit church built in Rome. And, church building was one of the things that the Catholic Church did in the Counter-Reformation to impress people with their power, but almost more significantly with their connection to the glory of God. And so the El Gesu Church was located in central Rome, very close to the Pantheon, the Forum. It's in the heart of Rome so that you can't miss it. And it was meant to then be easily accessible and to be that advertisement of the church. So we're going to take it step by step. We're going to start with the facade. When you're looking at the front here, to me, it is incredibly kind of Roman and Greek inspired, this classical inspiration. First of all, you have your patron's name across the frieze. So Cardinal Farnese is located in that frieze just above the first level of the church. And you kind of go up from the first doorway, then you see Farnes and so on. Farnesius or Farnese, he is the Pope and the patron. And so he is definitely then using his role as the head of the church to then build these great churches throughout Rome and beyond. Above the doorway, like directly above the doorway, but below the patron's name, you see the initials IHS, which is a reference to Jesus in Latin. So you have his initials there. That's directly above the door. You have on that first level pilasters up on podiums. And you have them on the ends, and they work their way into that center doorway. And then just by the center doorway, you have these engaged columns. Alberti from the Palazzo Rucellai would not like this design in that he liked unity of design. So he'd want to use just pilasters across the board. But here, I think that engaged columns and then the pilasters that go out try to give you the sense that it is wider than it actually is. Pilasters looking flat are going to look kind of like they're further away on that. And then the engaged columns have that more sculptural sense to them, closer, and kind of gives you that illusion of greater width than when you change to pilasters. On this, you have a little mini pediment then and a rounded Roman arch that transition you to the second level. Second level, you have the same ideas of the pilasters and the smaller engaged columns. But on the ends of this second story, you see the very intricate scrolls. It almost reminds me of a volute of an Ionic column. Adds a little bit of movement, adds a little bit of drama and sculptural element to the church. And that's something that's very Baroque. You see the beginning with this church, really, you see the start of this kind of new sense of movement and drama within church architecture. But this facade is probably more classically inspired, Renaissance inspired, but with a little dash of Baroque drama and movement with those scrolls on the side. So really it does give you this restrained, classically inspired exterior. And so that's going to contrast very well with the drama of the interior. So let's go and look at that. So the interior space basically is showing you this really beautiful open interior. Now it is a Latin cross-shaped basilica, but your transepts are not as long. They don't extend as far out from the body of the church. So it's not a very dramatic cross shape. And it has a singular dome over an area where the transepts intersect with the nave, and that is called a crossing. So crossing, again, is where transepts intersect with the nave. And so there's a little small dome over there, and that's where you're seeing a lot of the light coming through with the windows. You have, again, Roman influences with Corinthian pilasters. You've got rounded arches along the sides. And a lot of the materials here that you have are from other buildings across time. So got some spolia going on here. Those Roman arches, pilasters, the little pediment you see at the altar kind of looks like a little Greek temple. Those are all very classically inspired. Barrel vaulted ceiling as well. And then the ornate decorations, all the sculpture work you see, the differing materials, paintings everywhere, that's the drama of the Baroque. Because Baroque art is meant to be theatrical, dramatic, emotional, because they're trying to get you to connect and to be inspired and to, get to the point where you couldn't even fathom leaving the Catholic Church because it connects you so clearly to the glory of God. And that's what you see primarily in the sculpture work and the paintings of the church. The other thing I want to mention about the interior, if you notice, this has a really wide nave. And instead of having aisles along the side, which, the walkways, this church has widened the nave and no aisles, but just small chapels on the sides. So you're really focusing your attention then on the images, the sculptures, the paintings over the nave and in the altar. It directs your attention there so that the message becomes what you cannot avoid. So that's the interior. It's your traditional Christian basilica, yet it's focusing you more in this center portion here. So let's, shrink the transepts a little bit. Let's get rid of the aisles and just put chapels there. Let's focus everyone's attention on the message, which exists in the altar and in the paintings of the ceiling and above you. So going on to the ceiling, you have the fresco called Triumph in the Name of Jesus. And it's, you can't help but think of Michelangelo and the Sistine Chapel, and then how you're taking that to the next level of illusion, or that trompe l'oeil idea. And so in the middle, where the lightest portion of the ceiling is, you have Christ's initials again. And our artist here is tricking your eye into thinking people are hovering above you, and that the ceiling is opening up to the heavens. Like there's no ceiling material. It's just open, kind of like an oculus in the Pantheon, but this is open to the heavens. And you see people gathered around, floating, hovering around this ceiling. Some are and angels and people alike. And some of them are being allowed into heaven. And other people are falling out of this space because they're being rejected from heaven. And that's the message. So the message is, if you believe and you follow the so-called true faith, which is Catholicism, then you will be accepted and joined with Jesus into heaven. And I believe in this fresco, St. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, is being led into heaven to join with Jesus in heaven, because he is, the true believer in doing good deeds in order to, join and have everlasting eternity with Jesus. What I love about this painting, and I'm pointing to it here, is that, there are multiple materials here. You do have a painting, but you also have like stucco sculpture work, wooden architectural work. And our artist here has painted over into the woodwork and the stucco. So it looks like, there's people hovering on and around the architecture beyond the scope of the opening that leads to heaven. And he paints this illusion of three-dimensional figures by darkening some of the architecture with shadows. And that he just paints like a slightly dark paint over the architecture just to help with the illusion of cast shadows. So that there are figures actually above you. That's the feeling. It's so awe-inspiring. It's so amazingly realistic looking that, I imagine the Catholics in the church couldn't help but just get transported to this feeling of, the glory of the divine, and how that ceiling is actually opening up, allowing the glory of God to come out and into the space. So here's a little bit more of a close-up so you can see that and see some of the specifics of the painting, but how then he paints onto the architecture to create this sense that there are people in and amongst the sculptures. There are people, those who are faithful and those who are not, and it's asking you to question, who are you going to be? Are you going to be amongst the faithful who are allowed into heaven? Or are you going to be amongst those who are in the darkened kind of portions, who are being expelled from heaven and who await that eternal damnation? It's a powerful message. And then you mix that in the Baroque era with great music, the incense burning within the church, the power of the message being spoken by the church leader. It all was a very powerful advertisement for staying with the Catholic Church and not breaking away and so-called sinning to go along with Martin Luther and the Protestants. So again, this is El Gesu, the Jesuit church founded in the center of Rome. This is the first Jesuit churches, and the kind of example of great church building and arts that was being done by the Catholic Church during the time period of the Baroque era, part of a great advertising campaign known as the Counter-Reformation.